Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalam rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the weekly halaqah, and we're going to continue this week. We'll actually end next week on the theme of trees, but this week we just go on to the first slide, please. We're going to look at the relationship between people and trees. So we started this this theme in relation to Surah Ibrahim, ayat 24, and where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is making us think about that there's a tree, a good tree, which is like a good word. And the ayat begins with about looking and observing. And a question from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to us: why do you not see? Why do you not look? Why do you not think? But we was explaining in the previous lesson that was directed, of course, to the Prophet himself, peace and blessings be upon him. So it was to enable the change to happen in the Prophet's mind and his thinking. And then we then connect it to the hadith, where then he wants to then bring that ayat alive in front of the companions. But this week, I just wanted to very briefly look at the wider relationship between people and trees. It goes right back to ancient civilizations, and there's a case which is still fresh in our minds, particularly in the UK, and we'll open that in a few moments, of a tree that was cut down, and the outpour and the anger that was felt not just across Britain, but across many parts of the world. But just to explore, and it's a very deep subject, and it can bring in many academia subjects. But this relationship between people and trees, connects to cultures, so many different communities since time begun. So we'll just explore this general connection, and then next week, when we end this part on trees, we'll return to the connection between trees and Muslims, and then just tie it inshallah ta'ala all together. So let's just go on then with the slides. So I said to you there recently was a case here in the UK in relation to a sycamore tree and lessons of a sycamore tree. And this really did gain resonance across a large portion of people in the UK population, and across the world. And recently, as back as May of 2024, two individuals were charged. And even when the two individuals were going to court, because of the hype of this case, because of the anger and the outcry, the outpouring, their lives were at risk because of what happened. So what happened? This is a famous tree called the sycamore tree, and it's up. Those that do not know the UK, it's the northern part of the UK, and it's in a very sort of famous location, which corresponds to a very famous wall called the Hadrian's Wall, which goes back to Roman time. And for us, which is interesting, because when we explore from Part C, when we explore and have been exploring trees, or if we look at food forests in relation to becoming self-sustainable, we're looking at forests. We're looking at woods. So many trees together, and actually part of this focus on the tree that when we see it and how we explain this ayat of ayat 24 is about going out there and seeing a particular tree amongst other trees. But this disaster, this shocking crime which was committed, was of a single tree called the sycamore tree, and there were many TV programs made around the tree, not in relation to it being cut down, but over years. I think there were some films where they involved the tree. And it's just been there. It's just been a symbol of the locality. There's a single tree. And then people woke up in the UK to hear that it had been cut down. And that's what the outpour and the outcry was. We just go on to the next slide. You'll actually see it more. That's the single tree, and that wall there on the right-hand side is part of what I said, which is Hadrian's Wall. So you can see it's a beautiful tree. It was a beautiful tree. But no other trees there. But then it begs the question, of course, for us, because then the question is, then do we see a whole tree? The answer is no, we do not see a whole tree. So what do we not see? Then we don't see the roots. So in order for this tree to sustain itself and to become healthy as it was for so long, the roots have got to have moved out an amazing distance. And the more we learn about trees, the more that we learn it's not about the depth of the roots, that initially the root system goes down to a certain area. But then the key root system is quite shallow, but then it goes horizontal. That actually opens up a wonderful door in understanding systems thinking and qualitative mapping in relation to how we can connect that to trees. But the outpour, the outcry of this single tree. People used to go out on weekends. They used to visit the tree and take photographs for the tree. As I said to you, it was featured in a number of TV series and films. And so much now has been focused. I mean, it became a crime scene. It became a literal crime scene. And what's happened now is, and my personal connection in relation to this tree is the sapling. And so what they're trying to do now, and there has been some regrowth of the tree, but they've taken and they're now distributing saplings across the UK to certain organisations. And so I've been asked to put together a business case to see if we can take on a sapling. Whether that would be successful or not. But it's just this outcry, this outpouring, which opened up many people in different academia to talk about then this special relationship between trees and humans. We seem to just take it for granted that wherever we are, we're going to see trees. I think I said in the last Halaqah something like 3 trillion trees on Earth. But they are essential. They are essential for us as humans. We go on to the next slide. And this essentiality is important because we can't survive without trees. And we know what the trees do in relation to oxygen and carbon dioxide. And this is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so there is a symbiotic relationship between trees and humans. They are, in fact, the exterior organ. They're an organ that we just simply cannot have within our body. But the trees are essential for us in photosynthesis, in relation to the cycle of the oxygen and the carbon dioxide. So hence the liver, the kidney, the heart, essential. We can't survive without it. We also cannot survive without trees, although we take them for granted, which shows that we are, as a human species, in a state of ghafla, in a state of heedlessness. It's interesting, isn't it, where we look at that single tree in the UK, which there was the outpour of anger, and still is, how the two individuals were having to cover themselves. And although they still pleaded not guilty, subhanAllah, and yet the daily cutting down of trees across the world in the rainforest, is shocking. We are destroying an organ, we're destroying an essential organ that keeps humanity alive. So this relationship, this symbiotic relationship between trees and us is so essential. Here in Heartsea, we focus on the three key words, which is relationships, patterns, and context. And so, I've just been talking about this relationship between trees and humans, but the patterns, if we just look here, the key pattern of a tree from the leaf through to its twigs, its branches, is a branching pattern. It's a branching pattern. And that is an immediate relationship between us and humans. We actually look just like a tree. If we put our hands up, open and wide, then our legs out, that our hands is resembling a canopy, our body is resembling the trunk, and our legs is resembling the root. And the key pattern that we see in trees, and we also see in us in relation to the lungs, the circulation system, the endocrine system, wherever we look, the pattern is of a branching pattern across our veins, our arteries, within the lungs, the bronchioles. It's a branching pattern. So this unique relationship between trees and humans. Next slide, please. The beauty of trees and humans. So much has been written about trees. I'm just reading a book now on the relationship that we can learn about trees in relation to establishing a business and maintaining a successful business purely on mimicking trees. But the beauty of trees, that single sycamore tree, beautiful tree, and that's probably why there was such an outcry, because it was just a place of beauty. People, I saw so many photographs of so many people over the years that would go there to that location holiday, and they would go just to have a photograph taken with a tree, whether they had a deep understanding of why they were there. But so many people wrote and felt and contemplated about the beauty of that tree. And of course, then it manifests out. Why do people visit woods and forests? Because of this close relationship. It's I've never known anyone, and I've had a close relationship with trees all my life. My father worked in forests. He was in the forestry commission, so I've been there from a young boy. I've never heard anyone say that tree is ugly, that tree, doesn't look right, or whatever. Go back to that sycamore tree. Guess that you could say, well, you could say that the only thing you could say is, well, isn't it strange that that tree is on its own? But that requires deep learning. But the reason why it was there, it was a healthy tree, and that's because of the root system. So that's where you have to go into system thinking and explore wider. That root system was going a great distance. But I've never known anyone, wherever I've traveled in the world, can say a particular tree or a forest is ugly, is out of place. You could say it, of course. I'm talking about a natural forest, a natural tree. But obviously, where you would differ and it would connect to beauty is in relation to a man-made forest where the trees are established in a monoculture, where they're just basically pine trees going up or species going up, and they're only going to be there for a number of years to be felled, to be used in logging and making furniture. That's an ugly side of it. Next slide, please. Both reliant on water. Another relationship between trees. There's the beauty, the importance of the oxygen and the carbon dioxide, the photosynthesis. But this relationship between water, the key part of a tree's makeup is water. The key part of the human is water. And we are a water being, roughly 70% water. And so, yeah, that's another close relationship. Very important as well. The water, the structure of the water is very important in relation to energy, resonance, and frequency. Very important. And we'll cover that in another course. Next slide. Both reliant on each other, which just sums up to say we are, as a human species, in a state of ghafla, in a state of heedlessness, and we pass by trees every single day in the park, in the city, the town. There's going to be trees there, forests, woods, and even though we may walk through a forest, we walk through a woodland, we're not actually having a relationship with trees. But absolutely important, this relationship is fundamental. And next week, when we sort of put this all together, as a Muslim, the relationship with trees is essential. Okay? Because our home is Jannah, which is described in the canopy. Okay? Our home, and where our mother and father came from, Adam and Eve, they came out of a beautiful area of trees. And inshallah ta'ala, we are returning to that same home. But for some reason, and of course it's from shaitan, is on Earth, we are disconnected from this vital relationship. But we'll cover more of that, inshallah ta'ala, next week. Next slide. Living in communities. And I think if we understand that, then that will hopefully take us out of this state of waffle, this state of heedlessness. When we're looking at trees, when we're either looking from the micro to the macro, from the macro to the micro, and then we don't just look at the single tree, although we were focusing on the sycamore tree, but that sycamore tree is still having a relationship with its surroundings, with its environment. So it's with its community. And we have to understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created, he says it in the Quran, inshallah ta'ala, we'll cover that next week more, that he's created everything as a community. And when we are supposed to step up and we're not even there, because we haven't been given the opportunity by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're not qualified enough to become the Khalifa. And to become the Khalifa, we have to be able to support, look after all of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation. Understand that everything has its own community, and to understand how the community works, how from an individual tree to a wood to a forest, how it all works. And not just the tree, but all the other creation within that ecosystem, how it all works. And that's what then we have to then return, we have to connect to how everything works in Mizan, how everything works together. And it's about then bringing and understanding those principles of nature, those sunan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those universal laws. Next slide, please. And this is why because next week we're going to focus again by reconnecting ayat 24 and going into depth. And we'll probably just touch a little bit on the concept of the mother tree and how that research of a single tree, which you can say is like the sycamore tree, because that is definitely a mother tree, and how these mother trees now, through the work of biologists and ecologists like myself, is sort of saying to these people such as loggers who are cutting down trees in vast amounts the size of what a football pitch a day. Okay, so we're not going to stop you from cutting down trees, but at least keep that large tree, which is the mother tree, because that single tree is essential for the health and the stability and the future of the community. And obviously this is connected to why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is focusing on that ayat in ayat 24 of Surah Ibrahim. And then we can look at trees and navigation. And any of you who join me on our outdoor madrasa activities, that I always cover navigation of how we use trees to navigate, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put it into the trees, because everything happens through the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That the trees are there and they're in their own community, and but they're also, everything is on the earth to serve insan. Okay, everything is placed on this earth to serve us. But everything is praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And one of the functions of trees, as well as the essential function of keeping us alive, which is something that our bodies can't do, hence the tree is the external organ, is navigation. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, you know, the stars are there for navigation, and Allah talks about other creations, mountains, etc., and trees, which is also there, the sun and the moon, for navigation. And there's a great interlink again between trees and navigation, because trees are like the human being. They help us if we get lost. But in order to help us, we need to have a relationship with the tree to be able to learn how to read the tree. And, you know, there's a number of biologists now, ecologists, who have written books on how to read the language of trees. You know, so it's people now are, although they've always had a relationship with trees, and I think because of the issues, the crisis that we're facing in the world today, people are now beginning to question, you know, what is their role in life, and they're beginning to look out. And whether it means it's because they want to become self-sustainable and self-sufficient, so then it's a relationship now with growing produce, which connects us to permaculture and food forest. But there is more so now in the last, I would say, 10, 15, 20 years, a growing relationship with trees. And there's a lot of people now, doing courses on learning the language of trees. And there's a lot out there, as we know from Heartsea, and I've been teaching as well, on how trees are perfect organisms to help us navigate, whether it's through the leaf, through the branch, the shape, or through the trunk, or the root system, subhanAllah. And of course, that has a very close symbiotic relationship with, for us in the Quran, who we seek guidance from, which is there in Surah Al-Fatiha. Guide us to the straight. And so we obviously, Allah responds with Alif Lam Mim Dhalikal Kitabu La Rayba Fihi Hudan Lil Muttaqin, responds with the Quran in Surah Baqarah, but the Quran alone can misguide us. So we need those to help us on the road, on to the Surah Mustaqim, who are the field guides and those trackers, who are the ulama. So again, a very close relationship between trees and pious ulama. And Allah says, remain in the company of the pious. Why? Because they're the ones, as with the prophets, and there's four key groups that Allah mentions. These are the ones that you should follow. Okay, and so we'll try and cover that again a bit more next week. Next slide. The next week we would say will be the final look at trees and the lessons and the imagery used in the Quran, but we're focused on looking at that ayat 24, where again we turn to that hadith where the Prophet is then bringing that ayat alive, and then we'll go a little bit further down and then look at where Allah mentions another tree, and then we'll take it a little bit further down where then Allah then addresses the whole of mankind. Okay, go on to the next slide. So we put out there a challenge, and the challenge was, if you had a leaf such as this leaf, how would you be relating to it? What information would you be gathering? And this is important because obviously, why is it important? Because it's about getting out of the state of ghafla. It is about reconnecting us. It's about reconnecting us to the principles of Heartsea, which are there on the website. It's about returning to the correct way of understanding the Quran, ayat, surah. It's about then obviously understanding then everything through relationships, patterns, and contexts. And then but for us, it's about looking and seeing and thinking through the heart. Relationships, patterns, and context. And sadly today, if we just look at the school system and wildlife organizations, they focus so much just on the leaf because it's left brain hemisphere. And it's just about today about identification. So if you talk about trees, there's so much out there on how to identify a tree, the different species of the tree, how to identify twigs, different types of twigs. Identification sheets are just about everywhere. But nature learning today is not about relationships. And so we could give you so many identification sheets of different leaves. And I'm not saying it's not important, it is important. But we need to step back into the book and look for those connections. So if I was to pick up a leaf today, what would I be looking at? I'd be looking at the relationship between the micro and the macro. But the key thing is, I would want to be looking through the lens of relationships, okay? The patterns and the context. I'd want to be knowing the tree that the leaf actually came from. That opens up another sort of road to sort of travel down. I want to look at the patterns. So whatever pattern we see within this leaf, we looked at it briefly when we looked at the slides on the symbiotic relationship, the branching patterns with all the veins, etc. And if you've got a microscope and you studied just a leaf, I mean, it's a whole, a whole sort of PhD thesis. But whatever patterns, shape we see within one leaf, it's going to mimic the tree that it came from, 100%, from the twig, the branch, up to the whole tree. So it's about what is micro is macro, what is macro is micro. But to go through, every time you look at a leaf, is to go through the pattern, the form, and the shape. Okay, the pattern, form, and the shape, and its function. They all come together. They all come together. And if you just look at the shape, example of this leaf, which is going to be completely different to a shape of another species, I said to you, this is all connected to shape, pattern, the formation, and its function. And to understand all of this, we need the language of nature. And all of these shapes that we are seeing in the natural world are coming from the highest level, from the templates above. Okay. and they're coming down through vortices, through resonance. So just like the lungs has its shape, okay, has its form to serve a particular function. So is the liver, so is the kidney, and so is every single shape of a leaf. So we want to look at this, the size, the shape. Okay, we'd want to look at the feel of it and its textures, its features. And then we would then want to go into tadabbur, and we would want to look at the habitat that leaf, once we've connected it to the tree, is grown in. So what is that habitat? Okay. And in a great way is because if you tap into the heart sea, in one of the courses, we looked at the importance, and it's there also on one of the YouTube videos, we looked at the importance of a nature journal. So in the nature journal, it's where we connect to, the senses, but in the nature journal, it's about bringing everything together. So what I would do is, once I've established that leaf is connected to that tree, and I've established that habitat, I would then go to another location and look at another leaf, and then look at that habitat, and then do a comparison. Why then is that leaf, that tree, of a different shape compared to that leaf and a different shape? And that's where, again, we begin to look at a qualitative aspect, which is systems thinking, which is the same process that we need to go through in order to understand the Quran, which is the nazm of the Quran. We're looking at structure, order, and coherence. Why is, for example, why does Allah mention that word here in that surah or in that ayat, and he mentions either the same word in another ayat or another surah in that context? Okay, or so how we look and study the natural world should mimic the same process of how we study the Quran. So we'd need to do that comparison check, okay, and how they are, were different. I would then look at leaf adaptions, some questions. Keep asking questions, because Allah asks us questions. Okay, the whole point of ayat 24 in Surah Ibrahim initially to the Prophet is, why do you not see, why do you not think, the Prophet of Allah, in relation to the tree? But because we're in this state of ghafla, we don't think, we don't ponder. So look at the adaptions. Why is it that you might pick up a leaf and that leaf has got holes in it? Okay, why has that leaf got holes in it? Well, it could be because of insects. Okay, that's one area to look at. But it could be that leaf is adapted. Allah has created that leaf with holes in it for water drainage. Okay, we need to look at that, and that will help us understand the habitat which is around. Some leaves are silver colored. Okay, why would they be silver colored? Well, that's going to help reflect the sunlight. That's going to help prevent the leaf from becoming sunburned. Okay, like how some animals, like the hippo, etc., they cover themselves in mud. Okay, so again, return to the habitat. What's happening here? Okay, and it might be that you see a leaf which has a silver coating, is maybe 1 mile, 2 miles, or actually quite close to another habitat where there's no leaves with a silver coating. Why is that? What's taking place? Then you're looking at the direction of the sun, etc. And so that helps in the planning and the design of what's taking place in that ecosystem. That's also essential when we look at permaculture and that first principle of observation. Some leaves will have hairs on it. Again, that's for protection from wind. Okay? So if you're coming across a leaf, it's got hairs on it. Okay, so then that's telling you, okay, which is part of navigation, that and helps you to then look up and look at trees and the formation of the branches and the root system, the trunks, that this could be an area where the prevailing winds are quite high. You could see some leaves that have spines on them. So the spines are there for protection. So that then opens your thinking to, okay, so what would be the animal species around it? So we're beginning to now explore inside an ecosystem, which is systems thinking, which is the relationship between trees and humans. And one of it is about communities. We as insan are communities, and trees are also part of the community. They're not the only thing in a forest, but they're part of. And remember, we start off with the individual tree, because look at all the life forms and the communities that live within the tree, on the tree. Okay? Some leaves are narrow. And so if you have a narrow leaf, that would also prevent the loss of water. Some leaves have a very point. They come down to a point, which is like a lip with a little lip. Okay, that's to help the flow of water off. So that's telling you that location, then that there's an abundance of rainfall. Okay, so all of these help us to understand what. From that single leaf connecting to the tree, to the habitat, opens up a door to the ecosystem, helps us to read leaves, to read the language of trees, to read the Al-Kitab al-Kawn, to read the landscape, which we have to understand it in order to be able to read the landscape of the Quran. Okay? That's why our ulama said that the Quran, embedded in the Quran with so many ayats in relation to the natural world, is the Al-Kitab al-Kawn or the Al-Quran al-Taqwini. Or as some of our ulama past have said, that the whole of the Quran is a universal Quran. So the leaf is a micro of the macro. And even understanding the leaves, even autumn. So now we're in the UK, we're in the autumn, the leaves on the ground, great lessons in relation to leaves on the ground. What's taking place there? What's taking place, why, the importance of leaves on a tree. It's there for beauty. The leaf is there for protection. Okay, it becomes the clothing of the tree. How Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to the clothing of humans. Okay, there's also an ayat in relation where Allah talks about the clothing in relation to a husband and wife. But the most important aspect of clothing, and to understand clothing, is piety, and how to protect this piety, this shield of Iman. And then, why then do some trees shed leaves and some other trees don't shed leaves? That's also important. But understanding that those leaves that are on the ground, they're essential for the regrowth. Okay, because the natural world does not dig. So the leaves that you see on the ground, they shouldn't be touched. They're all serving a purpose. Okay, a critical purpose which is part of that ecosystem, which is part of the Sunan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as well as the fallen leaf is there for shade, for creation, for the insects, for the mini beasts. It's shade, it's shelter. And we, as Khalifa, possible Khalifa, need to understand how all of this works. So when we move into a wood, move into a forest, we've got the highest respect because we're moving into all these different communities and we need to understand the whole language. And so when you look at that sycamore tree, which was the first slide, maybe 99.99% of all those people there, they don't understand all of what we're spoken about, but it's there. What caused the outcry? It's there within them, isn't it? Which is the fitrah, okay? Which is the actual fitrah. So if the Muslims who were living in that locality, if maybe they were, I have no idea, only Allah knows. But what an opportunity there would have been, and still is, for Muslims in that community to then step up. But I don't see any Muslims that are leading any conservation that are there at the forefront in helping to understand what took place with that tree and to discuss what we've just briefly discussed today, because it's much needed in relation to understanding and processing all that's going on in the world today. So that brings us to the end of this halaqah. Next week, as I say, we will return. We'll put it all together to return to the ayahs of the Quran. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.